So what we have that people often overlook is the fact that an African nation, country, empire was the first to acknowledge the United States as a sovereign power. The first. People don't understand the significance of that. The significance of that means that if we did not do that, they would have never been recognized by anyone else in the world.
Wow.
Right? And at that time, the Sultan of Morocco and the Empire of Morocco was so prominent and very powerful that it made the United States have legitimacy. Right? So that's the context we're looking at.
Right.
So let's back it up a little bit more.
Yeah.
When we back it up a little bit more and we say, so what are those other treaties you were talking about? Those other treaties established that we had a working political relationship with European nations that were acknowledging the rights of Moors, right?
Yeah.
In those treaties, the Moors also reserved rights for the Jews in those treaties because they were always under attack by the European Christian powers. So the modern concept that we see where the Jews are friends with the European nations, that wasn't the case in the ancient days. It was always the Muslim Moors protecting the Jews from the European Christian nations.
Yo, good people. What's up? What's good, man? Blessed be your host, Caleb Smith. We are back with another edition of the 3 Milli Podcast. Man, tonight's guest is somebody who has been killing it, man. Information is so important. Us knowing who we are, that's even more important. And my guy, Aaron, bro, ever since we started building, working together, it was a person that he used to tell me about because, I mean, y'all may not even have any idea, but after each show, we'll be chopping it up for hours, man, talking about history, our rights, and the same name will always come up, and that's Mansa. So, Mansa, bro, I just want to say we appreciate you, man, for pulling up. God's timing is always just super important, man, because the first time I was excited, Aaron, he was excited. I was like, dang, bro, not feeling well, but now, bro, it's time. I appreciate you. Super busy, man. You travel the world, give out great information about who we are, our Moorish heritage, our legacy, and so much more. So, man, I appreciate you, bro.
No, I appreciate you having me.
Yes, sir.
You know what I'm saying? And I'm, you know, I've been checking out, you know what I mean, your material and I love it. You know what I mean? You're doing really excellent work for our people, our community. And it's great to see, you know, younger brothers coming up that got the mentality, the focus, you know, to really be at the forefront of making sure the information is getting out there to our people. So, you know, congrats to you and honors to you. You know what I'm saying? For sure.
Yeah, man.
Definitely.
Bro, it's about to be a good one, y'all. It's about to be lit. I'll probably say 2 weeks ago, me and Aaron, bro, we was just, you know, chopping it up. And then treaties, that was like our topic where we was just chopping it up, you know, off camera. He was like, Caleb, Mansa, bro, he got this dope interview. Check this out. And man, just seeing you go in on treaties. You know, more it's like, everybody's starting to talk about it now. You feel me? About, you know, our Moorish heritage, our legacy. Kyrie Irving, you remember with the whole presser and they talking about the Hebrews being black, that's anti-Semitic. And everybody focused on that part, but nobody focused on the hoodie that Kai that he was rocking. And Kai, bro, he was rocking that Moorish hoodie, bro. And he talked about the Berbers, saw the turban, all that. And treaties, man, as well with Aaron, bro, that just blew my mind. And man, seeing you talk about treaties. Again, people talk about us as Moors, who we are, but a lot of people overlook treaties. How important are treaties for us to know about?
Well, essentially, you know, treaties are very significant because when we could just look at the Native Americans, you know, they have a succession of treaties going back since, you know, the colonial era. And you know, to this day, even though they're citizens of this country, they never stop invoking their treaty rights. You know, so they're constantly bringing up what their treaty says they have rights to, you know, what they have access to. They use that to pretty much move the needle forward as it pertains to their rights and privilege, immunities, and different things that they're supposed to get from the government. And the interesting thing about that is, when we look at treaties and we look at our place in history as a people, you know, it's often said that, we're just slaves from sub-Saharan Africa.
Right.
We're not connected to this or connected to that. And what Moorish treaties does is it places us specifically at a point in time in history with a political identity, with a political status, with outlined in detail rights that says how we're supposed to be dealt with and treated. And a lot of times it gets ignored and it's not really acknowledged because, so many people are not really aware of the gravity of what treaties are. And essentially, let's for example, we have a book called Introduction to Moorish Treaties. It's about 400 years of treaties between the Sultan of Morocco and European nations. And so let's unpack a couple of things here because that one question just leads into so many different things. So let's acknowledge, for instance, they say we come from Africa, right? So we know we've been indigenous to the Americas, all of those different things. But let's just unpack that part. We are slaves from Africa, right? So who are these slaves from Africa, right? When you dig into the history of who these slaves are from Africa, we can point to a South Carolina law called the Negro Law, right? In this Negro Law, it says, Negro shall be confined to slaved Africans.
Wow.
In parentheses, ancient Berbers and their descendants. And then it says, not including Egyptians, free Moors, and Lascars, right? Wow. I'm paraphrasing there. So what we have is a law from South Carolina, the colonial era, when we were enslaved, with them identifying who the Negro is in U.S. law. So when we go by that definition, right? Because one of the things is, there's so many definitions out there, so many different dictionaries, so many different bodies of literature that, define who we are. When we just take that portion and let's just break that down. So Negro shall be confined to slaved Africans. So what they're doing is they're taking the term Negro and they're confining it. They didn't even define it. They confined it, meaning that Negro can't apply to anyone outside of this boundary who are slaved Africans, who the slave Africans are ancient Berbers and their descendants. Now, when you look up the term Moor in the modern dictionary, it's going to tell you Berbers and Arabs who conquered Spain in the 7th century, right? So right now, there's a controversy that me and my team and a lot of other people are kind of in a back and forth debate with modern day North Africans who are rejecting the term Berber and they want to move with the term Amazigh, right? And they're saying that they're doing that because they're fighting against the Arabs or the Arab identity and all of these different things, right? So let's back it up a little bit more. Yeah. When you look into further definitions, you'll find that Arab prior to the 1900s referred to anybody who was dark-skinned, black in particular. Wow. Black in particular. The Arabs say the Berbers are just Arabs who left Arabia before Hijri or before the last revelation of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. So the thing that we have to understand is, even when you look at the thing that Kyrie Irving was saying and what Kanye West is saying, all of these ancient identities come back to us.
Every time.
Every time. Yeah. So there's a thing where people say, oh, y'all just African Americans from Western Sub-Saharan Africa who were just enslaved. Now, me in particular, I did a DNA test. One of my ancestors is Pharaoh. What's his name? Pharaoh Ramses III from the 21st century. So it's a haplogroup called E1B1A, but they changed the name to another name. But what you're going to find is half of what's called African American men, right? Half of them are of the R1B subclad haplogroup, which is the one that's connected to King Tut. Wow. And the other half is the one connected to Pharaoh Ramses III. Wow. So if you look into most of the quote-unquote African-American men in this country, they're going to have one or two of those type of subclass. There's other ones, but those are the main ones. What that directly does is that ties us directly into ancient Egypt. So they say, oh, y'all not the ancient Egyptians. Y'all don't got nothing to do with ancient Egypt. But what they don't understand is Africa underwent a lot of migration patterns throughout the years. Yeah. There's no group in Africa that is where they're at currently. They didn't start out there. There was all these migration patterns. So let's back it up a little bit more. When we look at who we are today and we say, okay, we descend from these ancient people. So how did this happen to us? How did we get stripped of the identity? Because the reality is, let's back up one more second. Let's go to Federal Directive 15, right? This is a federal policy that was put together in the 1970s. This federal policy lays out the racial classifications in this country. So the racial classifications in this country, when you look it up, it says it doesn't pertain to science or anthropology. So that means that when we're talking about who's this race or that race and who's this descent, it has nothing to do with science. It has nothing to do with anthropology. It is purely a social construct, the way the federal policy is. When you look at all of the definitions, you start with American Indian. It'll say anyone having origins in the original peoples of America. You look up Asian, it's going to say anyone having origins in the original people of Asia. And then it lists the places in Asia. Wow. Then when you look up white, it'll say anyone having origins in the original people of Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, right? Then you go to Hispanic and it doesn't say anyone having origins, it just say anyone sharing the culture, language of Spanish, etc. When you get to black, it says anyone having origins in the black racial groups of Africa. Wow. What's that?
That's ambiguous. Yeah.
Very ambiguous.
Yeah.
Right. So when you research what the black racial groups of Africa is, it's pretty much the slave groups of Africa because they made black synonymous was slave, and they made our skin complexion synonymous with the status that was created.
That's right.
If you go past the 1600s, there were no people, there weren't no white people. It wasn't until I want to say Bacon's Rebellion that that they decided to start making the white status. You know what I'm saying? So black and white status didn't exist in the way we understand it today. So what they did was that's called a stripping. In the 13th Amendment, there's the second part of the 13th Amendment that says Congress is pretty much outlawing badges, incidents, relics, and vestiges of slavery. This is significant to understand for our people because what they don't realize is the badges, vestiges, relics, and incidents of slavery had to be abolished because they said if we just abolish slavery, that's cool, but it's not going to stop slavery from occurring again. We'll have to abolish the things that made slavery possible. So what made slavery possible was a badge of slavery. What's a badge of slavery? Having dark skin. Because when you were in slave days, having dark skin, you were presumed to be a slave. You had to prove through documentation that you weren't a slave, which means you had to have your freedom papers or your manumission papers or something saying you was free. Because if you didn't, you were presumed to be a slave. So what that badge of slavery did was strip us of the identity. Congress in 2008 came out with an apology for slavery. And in it, it says, whereas Africans were subjected to indignities of being stripped of their name and heritage, right? So they acknowledged that there was a stripping that occurred. So this is why it's so offensive to the modern world when we say we the original Jews, we the original Arabs, we the original Egyptians, we the original this, we the original Native Americans. They're like, no, you're not. Y'all are what? Black slaves.
That's right.
Right? Because there was a stripping of the identity and everybody's invested in us not knowing who we are and not accessing those identities because with that becomes the access to the rights, the privileges and immunities that come with that. So I wanted to lay that groundwork down first. So when we start talking about the treaties, we have an understanding of what it is that we, are accessing. So when we look at treaties are higher than international law. All right, treaties is the pinnacle. It is the foundation from which international law comes from, or other laws. So when you have treaties, you're dealing with the highest sources of law. International law is the next one. And then there's your national laws, and then there's your state, county, and local laws, right? So when we look at the Moorish treaties, they say we from Africa, right?
Yeah.
So if we're from Africa, then fine. We're from Africa. So what engagement does ancient Africa have with the modern world that would afford us rights? That ancient, interaction is well documented. So what you have is the Moorish treaties. Okay, so you have a treaty of 1786, right? The Treaty of 1786, I believe, was Mullah Ismail or Sidi Muhammad, one of them. And they had made a treaty, and in Islam, to the Sultan of Morocco, those treaties were made under the laws of Islam.
Gotcha.
So under the laws of Islam, those are not necessarily treaties, they are grants. So it was the Moorish sovereigns granting the United States privileges and rights to trade in the Mediterranean, to trade in the Atlantic, and to trade in the Americas. So what we have is those particular treaties lay out how we're supposed to be interacted with. It says, wherever we meet at sea, we should not enslave each other, or we should not be made into Negroes. See, so this is coming from the United States when they translated it. Right? So that treaty was supposed to last for 50 years, and it expired. So the United States went back to the Sultan of Morocco, his son this time, and like, yo, we need another treaty. And he said, well, I can't do nothing with this. My father did this.
Wow.
So what I can do is I can make another one on the same principles, but we'll put a clause in there that renews every 50 years unless either party wants to, terminate the treaty.
Yeah.
So what ends up happening is every 50 years that treaty is acknowledged to be renewed. So sometimes every president, even when you seen Hillary Clinton up there, even though she wasn't president, you seen Obama up there, you see what Trump came and said, reaffirmed that we have this relationship with Morocco, because Morocco, or the Sultan of Morocco at the time, because it wasn't the country of Morocco at that time. It was the dominions. It was an empire, you see?
Yeah.
So the Sultan of Morocco at that time was the first to acknowledge the United States as a sovereign nation. You see?
Yeah.
The treaty solidified that. But that was the first country to recognize the United States as a sovereign nation while they were in the middle of warring with Europe.
Yeah.
Britain, France, and all these other European nations.
Yeah.
So what we have that people often overlook is the fact that an African nation, country, empire was the first to acknowledge the United States as a sovereign power. The first. People don't understand the significance of that. The significance of that means that if we did not do that, they would have never been recognized by anyone else in the world.
Wow.
Right? And at that time, the Sultan of Morocco and the Empire of Morocco was so prominent and very powerful that it made the United States have legitimacy. Right? So that's the context we're looking at.
Right.
So let's back it up a little bit more.
Yeah.
When we back it up a little bit more and we say, so what are those other treaties you were talking about? Those other treaties established that we had a working political relationship with European nations that were acknowledging the rights of Moors, right?
Yeah.
In those treaties, the Moors also reserved rights for the Jews in those treaties because they were always under attack by the European Christian powers. So the modern concept that we see where the Jews are friends with the European nations, that wasn't the case in the ancient days. It was always the Muslim Moors protecting the Jews from the European Christian nations. So what we also find out in this particular treaty is it's something called a self-executing treaty, right? So when Obama was president, he argued he wanted to pass the international guns ban on guns, right, with the UN. and he's a constitutional lawyer. So he argued that Congress did not have to ratify the treaty they were making for it to be valid because it's already authorized by Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, which is the Supremacy Clause, that pretty much says that all laws, all treaties and agreements entered into prior to the adoption of this Constitution shall be binding.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
So what ends up happening, though, is Congress is like, yeah, nah, we don't, you need Congress to ratify this thing for it to be, valid. So what a self-executing treaty is when Congress ratifies a treaty, that means it's binding on all the citizens. It becomes a part of federal law. It becomes a part of the laws of that particular nation. Wow. So Congress ratified the 1786 and the 1835 treaty that they got with Morocco, which means it's a part of federal law. You see? So, this took years to figure out, by the way. A lot of trial and error with litigating with the courts and things like that and researching and figuring out how these things work. But I brought all of that up to say those particular treaties lay out how we're supposed to be interacting with the United States and any other power in this Western world. And it's there for us, but our people have an issue with the Moorish identity based on a lot of the propaganda that's been around. Right. Some of the propaganda being like, "Oh, Moors was enslaving us." There wasn't a nation on earth that didn't participate in slavery. And secondly, when we talk about slavery, we have to understand the context of it. First of all, the way the West African slave trade began is it began between Askia Muhammad from the Songhai Empire and I think, I forget his name. There's so many of the sultans from Morocco, but it's one of the sultans from Morocco that overthrew a previous sultan. Wow. And that previous sultan was friends with Askia Muhammad from the Songhai Empire. And so when the new sultan overthrew that sultan, he did it because he felt he was weak on the borders, on the French and on the Spanish, and protecting it. So when he took over, he reached out to Askia Muhammad from the Songhai Empire, which is Timbuktu, that area. Yeah. And he said, listen, you had good relations with the previous sultan, hopefully you're on good relations with us. Send some troops because we need to fortify the borders. So what Askia Muhammad does is he sent troops up there, but he didn't send them to help. They burned Morocco down, pretty much. They burnt it down, Wow. And so what ends up happening is the Sultan then sends troops there to attack, and they didn't really make it through the jungle, so that a lot of them died on the way. So what ended up happening is he went and got firearms from England and mercenaries from Portugal, and then invaded Songhai, rightfully so. Yeah. I mean, it's beef. Yeah. It is what it is. See, the concept that we look at it like we're all one, that wasn't our ancient concept of each other. And in actuality, the concept that, because we share the same skin complexion, we all brothers and sisters, was born out of our experience in slavery. That's deep. Which is a good thing, though. Yeah. Because they tore the families up so much that it was like, you don't know who you're part of. But if we share the same skin, we know we family somewhere along the line. And it is the same way we see kind of with the conflict with immigrants and ADOS and FBA and all of that discussion, which shows us what our ancient mentality was like. And we was divided along ideological lines, bloodlines, tribalism, etc. So what happened is when Morocco invaded, they took over. And the bloodlines merged, right? But even when we look at who founded Morocco, it was the Almoravids, who was from West Africa, right? And they went up and set up a city called Marrakesh, right? And then Marrakesh is what became and grew to what Morocco is. So we also see there's a case, an international case, criminal court of justice case where Morocco was suing Spain over the Western Sahara, which is a disputed territory. What ends up coming out of this is that the world agreed that wherever the Sultan of Morocco was recognized as Sultan wherever he was recognized as Sultan in Africa is where his sovereignty was at, or his religious suzerainty. That's important because what it does is it establishes West Africa as a place that was under the Sultan of Morocco's jurisdiction and authority, right? So there's also previous treaties where the King of England, the Queen of England is doing agreement with the Sultan of Morocco, and it recognizes him as the ruler of all West of Africa, meaning that everything in West Africa and beyond is under the Sultan's sovereignty and jurisdiction. Why is that significant? It's significant because when you follow the legal precedent for reparations, you know, that's a real big topic now.
Yep.
When we look at the reparations discussion in terms of what the Supreme Court has said, the Supreme Court has said we can't give you reparations because slavery was legal. Right? So we can't criminalize something that was legal at the time, even if it's not legal now, it was legal then. Right? So the interesting thing about that is it wasn't legal to enslave Moors because it was violating treaties. Wow. And so whoever was selling slaves in West Africa didn't have the authority to do so. So they didn't have the local chiefs and kings that they bought the slaves from didn't have the authority to sell them. And the Europeans who bought them didn't have the authority to buy them. So what we see is that's a crime. So what that does is that changes the precedence. It changes the narrative that makes, in terms of at least with the Supreme Court rulings, it makes it so we can prove that slavery was illegal when it pertained to us. You see? Yeah. So that's why the treaties is important at an ultimate level. And this is why understanding our identity within that context and, you know, embracing the Moorish identity is significant, because whether you want to say you're original Kemite, an original American, Aboriginal American, whether you want to acknowledge that we the original Jews or we the original Arabs or whatever the case is, the word Moor covers all of that. It covers all of it. When you look up in certain dictionaries, it'll say that Moor meant Negro, black man, blackie. Right? Literally says that in one of the definitions. I think of Webster's 1880 something. But the significance of that is that those were the time periods where they wasn't allowing us to read. So they were changing the definitions, but they were also letting their people know, like, this is who the Moors are. Wow. Right? And then they come up with the abridged version and then says Moors, Arab, and Berber. Yeah. To try to hide that that these are the Negroes that you're talking about. So this is why it's so significant, because it gives us standing. When we look at our treatment in this country, when we look at how other races and ethnicities are able to achieve things that we're not able to, and especially in the discussion of reparations, who they give reparations to? Japanese Americans, Italian Americans got reparations. Every group had a nation behind them. That's true. They had a national origin and national identity. The black brand, I'm not saying we don't embrace, black as an identity in terms of, this is our complexion. It's not about that. It's the status that it applies to. There was a case for Abraham Lincoln. Yeah. You know about that one, where he was representing a Moor. He was from Portugal, right? And this guy, the funny thing about the case is he had married this European woman, and the brother of her was mad because he said pretty much she married you could say the N-word?
Oh, yeah. Hey, you good.
All right, he said you married a nigga. You know what I'm saying? The black, right? So what ends up happening is, the brother didn't like that. So he sued him. He sued her brother. And the issue with the case was that Abraham Lincoln was like, my client, it's a crime to be a Negro, but my client is not a Negro. He's a Moor, M-O-O-R, even though his name is M-O-O-R-E, right? His last name was M-O-O-R-E. So the whole thing was, here we have a moment in time where a quote-unquote man who's perceived to be black in status, not skin, but in status, had rejected that and said, I'm not black. In status, and you owe me compensation for the slander. You see, so here we see a rejection of the black status, not the skin complexion, because it was already acknowledged that he had dark skin. Then we also have the Sundry Moors Act of South Carolina in 1790, where when the Negro Law was passed, they instantly filed a petition to say, we're not trying to get classed as Negroes under this law. Right, and they were enslaved and brought to the Americas and bought their freedom. Wow. Then we have Prince Abdul Rahman, Prince Among Slaves.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I have just did a master class, and there's a brother who's in that master class who's from Timbo, literally. Timbo is a place in West Africa where this brother was from. It's not Timbuktu, it's called Timbo, which shows you he wasn't from Morocco, right? But he wrote a letter to the Sultan.
Sultan's letter, right?
Right.
Yeah, gotcha.
Sultan's letter.
Yeah.
He wrote the Sultan, he wrote a letter to the Sultan. Well, the Sultan's letter is to people who... I'll get to that. I'll get to that.
Yeah. Hey, you good. You good. You cook it.
The letter, he wrote a letter to the Sultan. The Sultan read it, and the Sultan was like, look, he got with Quincy, Quincy Adams, the president at the time, and they worked it out, and he got free. So here's a slave, or a man who was enslaved from Africa, who's not from Morocco, who's not Moroccan, who wrote the Sultan, and the Sultan got him released, right? So now what's called the Sultan's letter is a lot of our people who were on the plantations who didn't understand so much about politics and law. The treaty became known to them as the Sultan's letter. Now, I have a friend of mine who, his grandma, Native American, they from North Carolina, in Wilmington, North Carolina. And they had a situation where, you know, she would drink sometimes, and she'd start telling them stories about what her grandmother used to tell her. Wow. And she said plenty of slaves used to just walk off the plantation with the Sultan's letter. They didn't know they was talking about the treaty, though. Wow. You see, because the treaty established that you can't enslave us. So, again, a lot of more say, oh, see, that's evidence of the selling out. This is just an immature and an emotional understanding and perspective of international law and politics and how, you know, things were set aside for us to escape certain brutalities of the slave system. You know what I'm saying? So, essentially, you know, just to kind of conclude that point, because I went on for a minute.
Nah, you good. You good.
Hey, the treaties is very significant to our liberation, our rights here, our identity here, because one of the things is people say we can claim any identity, right? One more thing, the Britannica. I forget what edition this is. But it's a encyclopedia that lists it says the American Negro. It says the American Negro is a new cultural product consisting of all the tribes of Africa, including Moors and Arabs, the yellow Hottentots in South Africa, and they start listing a bunch of other tribes. Among the quote-unquote African-American population, it's so much genetic diversity that we have bloodlines from everywhere in the world, literally. We can find every trace of bloodline in us, you see? And the significance in that is that what we are today isn't exactly what we were before, because now we represent the true melting pot and mixture. They took us from so many different places. However, what identity is going to be the one that leads us to the reparations, that leads us to the unification, that leads us to the liberation? And when we start discussing those things, we have to start discussing it within a vacuum of understanding law and politics and how that plays out, because that's the area where we're most immature at and where we're not fully developed like other groups. So when we start looking at what identities we should embrace for our legal and political purposes, which is a level that we have to elevate in our perspective of looking at all of these things, it's not going to be an identity that's better than more, because you're going to be able to tie in all of the ancient bloodlines through that identity. So with that part, I'll conclude that part of the treaty.
Man, listen, Aaron, he told me, he said, bro, this is your favorite Moor's favorite Moor. And y'all, Mansa is not disappointing at all, bro.
Thanks.
Bro, just from doing, research like over the years, I would learn and see that Thomas Jefferson had a Quran, you feel me, like in his office. John Quincy Adams, President Obama, one time during a presser, he was talking about Islam and our, relationship with Islam. He was talking about the Moors, Moroccan flags. You would see that in the background. Hoover, FBI, head director, he was a Shriner. You see him rocking the fez. The presidents rocking the fez. The 33rd degree Masons, all of these things. Why is it, man, that the people in charge who oppress us are the ones who tap into our Moorish history, but us sometimes we don't even want to understand that part of ourselves?
Well, it's because of it's because of what we went through, the bastardization of who we are. It did a number on us. So we don't we. It's like we have a thing where we don't want to embrace the thing that's going to allow us to win. You know, and the reality is they're running the world off of those virtues, off of the Islamic principles, off of the Moorish principles. Because see, here's the other thing about the treaty. In the Arabic, because it was originally written in Arabic, there's a article, I think Article 21, that says if a Moor shall kill or wound. Well, when the U.S. translated it, they put Moor in there. It was just them wanting to express their racism. They had to identify for their people who these people were. You know, that they were dark skinned, they were melanated people.
Yeah.
That was important for the U.S. In the Arabic, it just say Muslim. So in it says Muslims or Moors in the English who are subject to the dominions of the Sultan, and Moors who are not subject to the dominions. So that means that it covered all of us.
All of them.
Right.
Wow.
You know, even those who were under the dominion and those who weren't.
Yeah.
And so what happened is, even when we look at the Shriners was founded, these people have a lot of ritual that they do and stories about their origin, but it really came from, they were in a party, some Masons were in a party in Morocco, and they just loved the whole theme that they decided that they were going to celebrate that and call themselves Shriners and wear the fez.
Wow.
And so they made a whole culture of that. Now, there's deeper elements to it, where they're supposed to be the reason you see all the Shriners handling the children hospitals is because they're waiting for the Mahdi in Islam, or what's called the Messiah in other cultures, you see, so that they can protect the Mahdi or the Messiah when he comes, right? So as a Mason, once you reach the 33rd level, your next level after that is becoming a Shriner. And they put down the Masonic Bible and they pick up the Quran. You see? So a lot of our people, see, I used to have an aversion to Islam as well. I always loved Islam because of what I saw growing up in my community in the late 80s, early 80s, late 80s, early 90s in Brooklyn, New York, East New York in particular, how the Muslims displayed a lot of control and respect in our communities to decrease violence and do a lot of good things in the community. But what we have to look at is when you look at laws of a country is really based on their religious beliefs. That's literally it.
That's right.
You know, even with this country, when you look at the discussions when you look at the legal discussions they had on gay marriage, for instance, right? They would keep going back to American traditional values. And what that is the Christians, right? And specifically the Christian doctrine of discovery, right? So they kept going back to the Christian values because their laws is based on their religious beliefs. So it's based on Judeo-Christian. So the reality is that Islam was not seen as a religion to the ancient world in the way that we see it today.
Wow.
It was a law. This is the law you're under. You're under Islamic law, you're under Christian law, you're under Judaic law, etc. You see? So these presidents understood that. That's why they had a Quran, because they understood that this is the law book of the people we're enslaving. You understand? This is their law book. You see? And so what ends up happening is we see them embracing principles and virtues that we had into their system. I'll give you an example. Welfare. The whole concept of giving your citizens welfare come from when the Moors was ruling Europe, based on the zakat in Islam, where 1 to 2.5% of all surplus and profits made has to go towards charity, so you can take care of the poor, right? Let's look at the concept of case law in the United States, where let's say a case goes before the judge makes a ruling on it, now it becomes case law, so the next judge looks at that, how that was ruled in that situation, to come to their determination. That's the hadith system in Islam, where you find something that the Prophet, peace blessed be upon him, had said or stated. You validate its you validate it by checking the chain of narration and seeing how they dealt with that, and that's how we do that. But here's the other thing. So people say Islam is not African, right? The way Islam got into Africa wasn't by force. There was nobody more fierce than the Africans in warfare, and the Arabs just didn't have the warfare technology and capabilities that the Africans had. But see, Arabs are Africans. You see, because Arabia, when you look at the flora and fauna and the geographical makeup of the Arabian Peninsula is identical to that of Africa. You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So it's not a separate continent, right? And then we also, when you check out the bloodlines of those people, they're Africans. When you look at the DNA patterns of the haplogroups, you see that most of for the Y chromosomes, meaning the male bloodlines, most of them are from Arabia. Whether that's North Africa, East Africa, West Africa, and even Southern Africa. So the reality is that we're separating these people based on what the colonizers tell us, because the Middle East wasn't created until either the Berlin Conference, which was in the late 1800s, and that's when they created the whole term Middle East. Before that was Northeast Africa.
That's right.
You see what I'm saying? So what we see is them taking our virtues and our standards, and here's some other critical pieces to go along with that. Remember the movie First Night with Martin Lawrence?
Oh, yeah.
Remember they kept calling him the Moor in that movie, but they kept calling him the Norman, right?
Yeah.
Right. So the Normans is the ones that's responsible for the language of English that we speak now, right? And how the Normans was formed is that you had Northmen, not Vikings, because Viking was actually a job. There was no ancient people called Vikings.
Wow.
Right? So you had Scandinavians who came to Italy and met Moors who was ruling Italy at the time. And so they were fighting, they couldn't win against each other, so they decided to form a conglomerate and team up. And when they team up, that's when they start going other places. They invaded England, and they established what we understand now as the modern English. Wow. So a lot of the systems of common law and a lot of these systems that's in European culture that gave it a sense of civilization come from the Moors, you see, and Islam in particular. And when we look at Islam in particular, it was the one system that we used to rule the world most effectively. The only problem we had was that we did not form a central authority. That's what the historians say. We did not form a central government. We just had different empires and different kingdoms, ruling, maybe in unison to a degree, but it wasn't unified.
Right.
And the Europeans unified under the Christian doctrine of discovery, which is the jurisdictional basis claimed for them in America. Yep. Because there was a case called Johnson versus McIntosh. Johnson versus McIntosh was a case where the Native Americans, American Indians, brought a lawsuit and said, hey, y'all have authority in America because we made treaties with y'all. The Supreme Court came back and said, no, our authority comes from our inheriting that authority from England, who got it from Rome or the Vatican, which is pretty much saying the Christian doctrine of discovery. Wow. So the only thing that could nullify the doctrine of discovery and its application is the Moorish treaties, because the Moorish treaties were supposed to nullify its application to us. That's why they were made in the first place. So a lot of these things that we see, the presidents, the governments, and the Masons and all that, they're all running off of virtues that we taught them. For instance, the first Masonic lodge comes from out of Abbey in Scotland, from the earldom of Moray.
Wow.
Moors established the Scottish rite. The Moors, I mean, don't even let me get going on when it comes to Europe, man. Like, the Moors history there. But yeah, that's why you see them running with a lot of our virtues, because that's where it originates from. You know what I'm saying?
Wow.
For sure.
Man. Yo, Mansa, you killing this, bro. You killing this, man.
Hey, man.
Bro, one of my last few questions, I'll probably ask like 3 more, man. But
it's all good.
Our rights, knowing, who we are. And film too, right? So Martin Lawrence, you was talking about that. I remember, seeing that film growing up. Robin Hood is like one of my personal favorites, right? Dr. Jose Pimienta Bay is a beast, bro.
Yes,
Had him on the podcast, bro, and he was dropping like heavy gems.
Yeah.
And I told him, right, like Robin Hood, I would get so mad because, you know, the first one, Kevin Costner, Morgan Freeman, we would have to play it in class all the time. And I remember, man, even like in high school, like nobody's talking about Morgan Freeman is a Moor. Like it's a black man right there from Jerusalem. And we just acting like he just randomly came along. Robin Hood, new one that came out. Jamie Foxx had all the technology. It was fire. Right. Yeah, all the technology, showed him how to shoot. Every single time they make sure it's a black character. But then, like what you talked about earlier, now, you know, they tell us that the Arabs, they were fair skin, fair complexion. But then in the films, all of us were always black. Why is it in one breath the Arabs or the Moors were light skinned, but then when it's time for films, all of us are always how we, you know, truly were? Why is it like that?
Well, it's like that because two things. There's different agendas at play. Usually when Hollywood does a movie about medieval England, they're going off of the historical records and sources of what they say the Moors are.
Wow.
So in today, when they talk about it, not necessarily in film, but when they just talking about it, they want to separate us from that identity because they know that's where our power lays in that identity. So, you know, modern times when they're talking about it outside of film is, oh, the Moors weren't black, they weren't, you know, dark-skinned people like that. You know, they were Arabs, how you would see modern Middle East.
Yeah, exactly.
I've been around the world. 2021, 6 different countries, right, in 1 year. You know, thanks to my wife, she had me all around.
Hey, shout out to your wife for that. That's dope.
Thanks. So the thing is though, when I was in Saudi Arabia, I was doing Umrah. Yo, I got video of Arabs that is indigenous from there. Wow. Darker than me.
Wow.
I had to ask one brother. He ain't speak no English, but I was trying to ask him
like yo, where you from?
Where you from?
I feel you.
You look like bro from the block. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, but he's from there. You know what I'm saying? So the thing is, like I said, there's another dictionary called Dahl's Dictionary that says that the Arabs are black-skinned people.
Wow.
So what we see is in the ancient times, understanding of who a people were came from their bloodline. Nowadays, it's not about your bloodline. If you speak that language. So anyone who speaks Arabic is an Arab.
That's crazy.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They changed the context of lineage and descent. Because it was all done to steal our heritage and identity. So when the people start speaking these languages, even when you talk about the Semites, right? Who the Semites are, that go back to us. But what's included in it is people who speak Semitic languages, not necessarily people who descend from Semitic bloodlines.
Wow.
It's those who descend from Semitic bloodlines, but also those who speak the language. So the reason that's done that way is it's to separate us in the real world from the actual identity that we have to us. But in film, they know when they're talking about medieval England, for instance, I'll give you another example. Game of Thrones, House of Dragons.
Yeah, they start having a fit. The one time it's a black character in there.
Yeah, but you gotta understand, check it out. Lord Corliss, in the books, he's supposed to be a pale-skinned person, but when they wanted to add color, when they wanted to add melanin to the show, why did they make Lord Corliss a quote-unquote black man? That's because he's called the sea snake, and they deal with the seas. Wow. They ran the seas.
Navigators.
Right.
Yeah.
So they know that the Moors in medieval times ran the seas and ran the ships and the trading and all of those types of things.
Right.
So anytime you start dealing with medieval settings, they're not going to acknowledge anything that's going on in the modern. They're going to tell it like it is because all of their sources, like Ancient Modern Britons and a lot of other books, establish the Moors as Negroes, black people in medieval era. Now, one other thing that I want to say to touch on, something I brought up earlier,
you good,
is when they were passing the 13th Amendment. Well, it was after it was passed and there was some congressional discussions. They said the Negro is free, but free is not a status in law. And the Negro, in order for him to have, rights, we can't give him rights that he didn't have in medieval England. So this is why they went and passed the 1865 Civil Rights Act and these other Civil Rights Act to try to give us rights that we didn't have in medieval England as Negroes. But the thing is, we wasn't in medieval England as Negroes. We were there as Moors, and it's documented in treaty. You know, then when you start digging into people like King George, people like King James.
King James. Yeah.
These people were Moors. They're described as black skin, swarthy. When you look at who signed, okay, so you had the U.S. Constitution. One time, me and my people, we went to order the U.S. Constitution. They told us it was like, we call Library of Congress. They was like, it's like $1,500. You're like, that.
That's why they do that. Much? Yeah, they don't want you to have access.
Yeah, but they like, well, you know, it's not just the U.S. Constitution that we know today. It's the Articles of Confederation. It's the Articles of Association. All of that stuff is considered the Constitution of the United States. Wow. Now, the Articles of Association, when you research who were the signatories to it, you're going to read and find out that a lot of the signatories to it were black people. People who are described as being black, having swarthy skin, you know, people hating on them in England because they were black. So the reality is, so much of the history has been lied about, and so much of our identity has been assumed in a lot of areas that we're not even aware that when we're talking about a lot of different things, we're really talking about us. But at that point, I'll digress, but that's why they kind of make it separate, you know?
Man, so listen, bro, if we didn't have a shoot scheduled tonight, bro, I'm telling you, man, we would just keep building. Indeed. So shoot, probably just two more questions, second to last one. Man, knowing that now, that's mind-blowing. Our history, knowing that with the Moors falling, it set us back, 1,000 years, right?
Yes.
That's what said. Shoot, I think to me 10,000, because knowing all the things that we were doing, it was just mind blowing.
Absolutely.
What do you think, or where do you think we would be if 1492 never happened?
Well, I'll put it to you like this: based on Stanley Lane Poole said that if when the Moors fell, set the world back 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So let's look at something real quick. Let's talk about. The big thing is transhumanism now in science and technology. Going beyond transforming the human into something else, right? That comes from out of what's called Neoplatonism, right? Neoplatonism comes from Platonism, from Plato, right? So there aren't any Greek writings that exist exclusively in the Greek form. They are all writings that survived based on Moorish critiques of these Greek philosophies. Wow. In Islam, you have one of the scholars that did it. I forget what his name is, but it was an Islamic scholar who did a lot of critiquing of Greek literature and comparing it to, you know, different elements of Islam to say where they was right or where they was wrong. But most of those writings come from Moorish scholars in Spain. Wow. So what that does is that tells you that if you have a text where Moors is breaking down and pretty much saying these Greek writings is BS, right? And also the Greeks is us too. That's another thing for another time. But the point is when you have Moors critiquing these works, and these works are what they're saying is the pinnacle for transhumanism and technology, then if you got Moors critiquing it and saying, nah, this is BS,
trash.
All I can say is imagine.
Wow.
Because transhumanism is the biggest topic where you talk about merging man with machine, uploading the consciousness to the cloud.
Relationships being that way.
Even in that, you know, that whole thing, you see? So if we had the Moorish critiques of those things, then we would know why we shouldn't deal with those things and why we should be building other technologies or moving the world forward in other ways. So when I look at where we would have been at 1492 never happened, I would say we would be like living in the Jetsons right now, because when you look at what the Moors brought to Europe, they brought street lights.
Yes, sir.
When you look at...
In Cordova, right?
In Cordova, Seville, so many of the different places. But these are things that was already existing in Africa. In Benin, you had... two-story homes with toilets on the top floors and plumbing systems, you see? So we brought this technology to Europe. The reason we have swimming pools is because they were dirty, so we had to put chlorine and put them in there and just clean them up that way. So just so much technology and what we did, we civilized Europe at that stage. And when you look at Europe, you can see that influence is still there. So that's just a testament to where we would have been if they didn't. I'll give you an example. One more for that for your question.
Of course.
Africa ain't been the same since they sold us.
Yo, what we talk? Look, Aaron looked up. We was just talking about that last week.
They said West Africans sold the Moors into slavery, right?
Hey, you said the block ain't never been the same.
Ain't that block?
That's what he said. Yeah.
But look at America.
It's popping.
It's popping.
Dang.
Skyscrapers. We built the whole country, right? So that shows you where we at. This is the Moors built this.
Yeah.
That's the source.
Yeah.
It's just we built it under oppression. So when you think of all these inventions that was coming out from slavery, I used to think
pressure.
Under pressure.
Yeah.
I used to think that the Asian man, they so brilliant. They brilliant and all that. But when you look at the patents and what our people made in this country, we made it here.
Yeah.
So all this technology, all this innovation is still happening. It's just we're not getting the credit for it.
Yeah.
You see, so that's what I would say to that.
Yo, Mansa, my last question, bro. I hate this because of the time constraints, but you already know I got your number. Gotta have you back on soon.
Absolutely.
For real, bro. All right, so examples from, us being on the plantation, letters to the Sultan, walking off, being free, hearing the stories, from the grandmas, North Carolina. One could say, especially, all the haters out there as well, if that's the case, then how come everybody couldn't be free? And then I would say second part of that question as well, how does us knowing who we were and who we are free us as a people?
Well, I take a classic example of the hand. If I hit somebody with my finger, it's not going to work as much as I close my fist and ball it up and unite it. So the thing is that the reason we all couldn't be free is because it was just a lot of sellouts among us. Like just in general, when we look at the Haitian Revolution, and I know that's an island as opposed to a mainland like the United States, so some of the tactics and situations not going to work, but they were all on code what the liberation process did, and that's why it worked. In America, you had a lot of rebellions, but a lot of people were sold out. You see, so the sellout element, whether ancient or modern, is the element that keeps everybody from being free. So that's one thing. But then the other thing is the identity itself won't free us. It is taking the identity and acting on what it's supposed to afford us. Nothing's going to happen without the action.
That's heavy.
You see? So we have to take the certain actions to get free. But what the identity does is it removes them from applying the badge of slavery to us. Because as long as we remain their branded slaves, then we're not going to ever be free from anything because we're literally claiming that we're their property. You see, when you take on the identity that you're supposed to have, then you can no longer be a slave and a servant to them in that same capacity because they don't own that, right? So even when we look at the new nations in Africa, right, they have the same problem because none of them named their countries.
Yeah.
You see?
Borders, all
none of
things.
that.
Yeah.
That was all created by Europeans. In fact, you have movements in Nigeria right now, Biafra, who's seeking to abolish what Nigeria is and come with the different nations that they had prior to it. So the reality is that as long as we identify with the creation of what the colonizers made for us, then we won't even be able to begin to be liberated or to be free because we're not even in the right mentality of who we are. You see, and so much of our identity plays a role in how we see the world. So when you look at America, you got all these different nations and ethnicities that's selling their cultural foods and bringing their culture. By us not embracing the identity that had us free, we're embracing an identity that say we are slaves. And by continuing to identify with that, then we're saying we're their property. And that is why we won't be able to get free without the identity. The identity is a tool. It's not the end all be all. Action is the end all be all. But that's just one of the things we need to incorporate in our liberation efforts. So that's how I say that.
Mansa, bro, you bodied that, man.
Hey,
for real. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having
Look,
me.
I know you're probably extremely busy, so, man, just thank you for sitting down, chopping it up with me, man, sharing this great knowledge, information. And no, a part 2, bro, it has to happen very, very soon because I just need time, man, just to, like, really sit down with you, ask even more questions, pick your brain more. Bro, where can everybody follow you, keep up with your work, all that good stuff?
Man, first, I just want to say, honest for having me. You know what I'm saying? I greatly appreciate it. And definitely down to do a number 2 because a lot more info to share. Everybody can reach me at I got a lot of websites.
Yeah,
So
nah, you good.
Moorish Society, that's MURAKUSH society.org.
Yeah.
Then there's MoroccanLawFirm.com. MoroccanSociety.org is laying out the history. We got articles, tons of free information for people to check on and really get themselves familiar with the history. The Moroccan's law firm is breaking down a lot of the different law aspects, what laws pertain to what in terms of our identity as Moors. You can also catch me on Instagram and the mansa.i.muhammad. And just type in Mansa the Moor on the net. I should pull up. I'll be able to come up. You know what I mean? So definitely, like I said, man, I love what you're doing.
Thank you, King.
This is
Appreciate
extraordinary.
it. Thank you.
You're definitely a young king, man. Keep going. I'm whatever you need from me, man. I'm here to
That's
help.
love.
You know what I'm saying?
Appreciate that,
Definitely.
man.
So for sure.
Yeah. Man, wow, humble, bro. Tap in, follow Mansa. He's killing it, Aaron. He was right. He's your favorite Moor, man. He bodied this. Make sure to show him love, support any way possible, man. Tap in with him. We appreciate y'all. Blessed be host again, Caleb Smith. Another fire episode. See y'all soon. Peace.
Peace.